Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Strategic Labs, the channel where we deeply analyze the ideas, narratives, and strategies behind the documents. We are Sarah and Mark. Today, we are going to dive into the material we have on the table. Before we start, please leave a like, share the episode, subscribe to the channel, and remember to check the description for the links to access the original material.
Yeah, so the material we're really unpacking today is Edward H. Whitmore's book, Covert Operations Series Germany. And, I mean, it is just an exhaustive, incredibly dense text.
It really is. It spans nearly a century of espionage. And, before we even get into the historical timeline, we have to talk about the cover art of this book.
Oh, absolutely. The cover is striking.
Right. It essentially functions as, like, a visual table of contents for everything we're going to explore in this deep dive. It's a split composition.
Yeah, it sets the tone perfectly.
So on the left side, wrapped in these dark shadows, there is the silhouette of a Nazi officer in a high-collared trench coat. And he's standing beside this heavy mechanical Enigma machine.
It feels very cold, very analog, very steeped in that 1940s brutalism.
Exactly. But then as your eye moves to the right side of the cover, that shadow dissolves into a hyper-modern, neon-lit Berlin skyline.
Right, you see like overlapping digital screens, cascading code, server racks.
Yeah, and dead in the center, bridging these two entirely different eras, is a glowing red sniper's crosshair.
And that visual perfectly distills Whitmore's central thesis. Because we are looking at a geographical space.
Germany, right.
Germany, a country that has spent the last 80 years sitting directly on the fault line of the world's most volatile conflicts.
Which is wild when you think about it.
It is. And because of that unique positioning, its intelligence agencies have been forced into a state of, well, relentless, almost Darwinian adaptation.
Yeah, the book traces this very dark, deeply compromised evolution.
We move from the physical, ruthless sabotage of the Third Reich, through the suffocating paranoia of the Cold War, and finally into the invisible cyber battlegrounds of the modern era.
And what becomes overwhelmingly clear is that the shadows of that totalitarian past, they didn't just vanish when the regimes fell.
No, they lingered.
They lingered, and they shape how modern democratic oversight struggles to function today. We are going to see how the architecture of terror eventually morphed into the architecture of surveillance.
So true.
But let's start where the book starts. Back in 1942. I want you, the listener, to imagine stepping out of a subway station in Washington, D.C.
Right into the thick of the war.
Exactly. It's June 1942. The air is humid, heavy with wartime anxiety. You walk into the headquarters of the FBI holding a briefcase.
A briefcase containing over $80,000 in cash, which was a staggering fortune at the time.
You're sweating through your civilian suit. You approach the desk and demand to speak directly to J. Edgar Hoover.
Which is just an insane thing to do.
Right. And your message. You are a Nazi saboteur, handpicked by German military intelligence, dropped off by a U-boat on American soil just days ago, and you're here to betray your entire team.
It sounds like a scene from a pulp spy novel, but that is exactly how the most audacious physical infiltration of the United States in World War II unraveled.
Operation Pistorius.
Yeah.
And it forces us to ask, how did an intelligence apparatus so feared worldwide miscalculate the human element so catastrophically?
Operation Pistorius is really the perfect baseline for understanding the limits of human intelligence, or human T.
Right.
Because in the early 1940s, the Nazi regime, specifically Admiral Wilhelm Canaris,
The head of the Abwehr.
Right.
Germany's military intelligence.
Exactly. They harbored these grandiose ambitions to strike the U.S. directly. And the goal wasn't to win a military battle on American soil.
No, it was to cripple U.S. wartime production.
Right. They wanted to blow up aluminum plants, destroy the hydroelectric facilities at Niagara Falls, and derail critical railway lines.
I have to challenge the premise of this operation right out of the gate.
They lay it out.
Looking at the logistical nightmare of crossing the Atlantic in 1942, was this plan an audacious stroke of military genius that simply suffered a stroke of bad luck with a weak recruit?
War.
Or was this an act of sheer panic desperation? Like, did the Abwehr look at a map, look at the sheer industrial output of American factories, and realize they could never win a war of attrition?
So they threw a highly engineered Hail Mary pass.
Exactly. A desperate Hail Mary.
The evidence in Whitmore's text points heavily to desperation masquerading as audacity.
That makes sense.
The German high command, despite all their propaganda, they understood numbers. The American industrial machine was a sleeping giant that had just woken up.
Yeah, conventional warfare across an ocean was physically impossible for Germany.
So asymmetric warfare, sending small teams to disrupt supply chains was literally the only mathematical way to slow that giant down.
But their critical flaw was the hubris. They assumed they could control the human variable in a completely hostile, hypervigilant environment thousands of miles away from Berlin.
Let's dig into the mechanics of how they actually tried to pull this off, because the preparation was intense.
Oh, it was wild. They didn't just grab random soldiers. They specifically recruited Germans who had previously lived in the United States.
Right, guys who knew the culture.
Yeah, men like George John Dash, who had been a waiter in New York, and Ernst Peter Berger. They needed men who knew American slang, who knew how to order a beer without looking out of place.
Men who wouldn't be confused by the American transit system.
Exactly. And the training was exhaustive. The Abwehr set up a specialized sabotage school on an estate near Berlin.
They drilled these men in chemistry and explosives. They were taught how to construct delayed action timing devices.
And how to wire detonators to railway tracks so they would only trigger when a heavy locomotive rolled over them. Not a passenger train, a freight train.
They were also provided with deeply researched forged identities. Fake Social Security cards, draft deferment cards.
They even underwent intense psychological stress testing. But the transportation method is what makes this feel so surreal.
The U-boats.
Yeah, they loaded these guys onto U-boats. One team on the U-202, another on the U-584.
And they spent weeks submerged in these claustrophobic diesel-fumed steel tubes, dodging Allied patrols.
Until they literally surfaced off the coast of Long Island, New York, and Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida, under the cover of thick fog.
They rowed ashore in rubber dinghies, and they had their explosives packed in these meticulously waterproofed wooden crates that they buried in the sand.
So they engineered the physical components flawlessly. But like we said, what they couldn't engineer was the psychology of isolation.
Exactly. The moment George Dash's team landed on a beach in Amagansett, New York, they were almost immediately spotted by an unarmed Coast Guardsman.
John Cullen, right, he was just walking a routine patrol.
Yeah, and Dash panicked. He shoved cash into Cullen's hand, threatened him, and told him to forget what he saw.
Which is the worst possible thing you could do.
Cullen took the money, walked back to his station, and immediately reported it.
And from that single human interaction, this entire multi-million-dollar operation just starts to crumble.
It falls apart instantly. Dash gets his team to a hotel in New York City, but the pressure breaks him. He realizes a massive manhunt is about to begin.
Right.
So he takes the operations budget and gets on a train to Washington, D.C., and makes that fateful walk into the FBI headquarters.
He just spilled everything. The targets, the names of his compatriots, the location of the Florida team.
Everything. Within 2 weeks, the FBI had swept up all 8 saboteurs before a single explosive was rigged.
It was a humiliating failure for Canaris and the Abwehr. It's like this highly engineered machine, but with a faulty microchip.
That's a great way to put it. It proved that human assets, no matter how well trained in explosives, are inherently fragile.
Right. They suffer crises of conscience. They succumb to fear.
They make irrational decisions when isolated, and the consequences were brutal.
6 of the 8 men were tried by a secret military tribunal and executed in the electric chair just weeks later.
Dash and Berger were spared the death penalty for cooperating, but the message to Berlin was incredibly clear.
You cannot physically infiltrate the American home front.
Exactly. So if physical sabotage is off the table, how do you wage an asymmetric war?
You pivot. You move away from the fragility of human psychology and put your absolute faith in machines.
You move to the invisible war of the airwaves.
Which brings us to the Enigma machine. If Pistorius showed the weakness of human agents, Enigma represented Germany's absolute hubristic faith in technological supremacy.
Enigma represents the absolute zenith of that technological hubris. It was originally patented right after World War I by an engineer named Arthur Scherbius.
Right, and it was originally for commercial banking purposes.
Yeah, but the German military, stung by how easily their codes were broken in the previous war, adopted and militarized it.
To understand why the Germans believed their communications were invincible, we really have to look at the mechanics of the machine itself. I want to break this down so it makes sense.
Sure, let's do it.
So if you look at an Enigma machine, it basically looks like a heavy wooden typewriter, but the keyboard is just the interface.
Right, when a radio operator presses the letter A, the machine doesn't just print an A.
It sends an electrical current through a series of wired, rotating wheels called rotors.
Let's trace that current. You press A. The electricity flows into the first rotor, which scrambles the signal internally and passes it to the second rotor.
Which scrambles it again and passes it to a third.
Exactly. But here is the critical mechanical feature. Every single time you press a key, that first rotor physically clicks forward one position.
Oh, wow. So the electrical pathway is completely different for every single keystroke.
Exactly. If you press A 3 times in a row, the machine might spit out X, then L, then P.
So it completely eliminates those simple substitution patterns that code breakers traditionally relied on.
Yes. But the military added another layer of complexity on top of that. The Steckerbrett, or plug board, on the front of the machine.
Right, before the electricity even reached the rotors, operators would use cables to plug letters into each other.
If they plugged A into G, pressing A would send the current into the rotors as if the G key had been pressed.
So when you calculate the possible combinations, the choice of which 3 rotors to use out of a box of 5,
The starting position of those rotors.
and the myriad of plugboard connections, you arrive at roughly 159 quintillion possible settings.
It's an unimaginable number. And German military protocol demanded that all units, from the panzer divisions to the U-boat wolf packs, reset these configurations every 24 hours at midnight.
It sounds mathematically impossible to crack.
It would have been impossible with human minds alone. But the machine had a fatal fundamental design flaw.
The reflector.
Yes. Scherbius, the original inventor, wanted to make the machine user-friendly. He wanted operators to be able to use the exact same machine to encrypt an outgoing message and decrypt an incoming message without flipping any switches.
Okay.
So to achieve this, he installed a component at the end of the rotor sequence called a reflector.
And this is where the mechanics betray the math.
Completely. The reflector takes the electrical current after it passes through all the rotors and simply bounces it back through the rotors in reverse.
So this clever wiring means if A encrypts to Q, then typing Q will decrypt back to A.
Exactly. But the mechanical consequence of bouncing the signal back on a different wire is that an electrical circuit can never complete upon itself.
Wait, meaning?
Meaning a letter could never, under any circumstances, encrypt to itself. And A could be any of the other 25 letters of the alphabet, but it could never be A.
Okay, I am stuck on something here. Why is that such a massive vulnerability? I mean, if there are 159 quintillion settings, who cares if you know what one letter isn't?
Right.
It still leaves millions of possibilities. It sounds like knowing a puzzle piece isn't blue. It doesn't help you find the actual piece.
It doesn't help if you only have one letter. But the Allies intercepted thousands of messages a day, and the German operators, despite their sophisticated machine, were humans.
And humans fall into lazy routines.
Exactly. They would start their 6:00 a.m. weather reports with the exact same phrasing every single day. Wetter für Hirsch, meaning weather forecast.
Ah, okay. The cryptologists at Bletchley Park in England called these predictable phrases cribs, right?
Yeah.
So if you take the intercepted gibberish, the ciphertext, and you slide the word Wäscheverhörsage underneath it, letter by letter.
You slide it to a position where a W in the ciphertext lines up with the W in your crib.
And you know instantly with 100% mathematical certainty that this is the wrong position.
Because the Enigma's reflector makes it physically impossible for a W to be encrypted as a W.
Oh, wow. So you use the machine's own design to logically eliminate millions of incorrect settings without ever having to test them.
Exactly. It's vital to note that the theoretical foundation for this was laid by Polish cryptologists in the 1930s, specifically Marian Rejewski.
Right, and when Poland fell, that knowledge was smuggled to the British.
And at Bletchley Park, Alan Turing and a massive team of analysts mechanized this process. They built machines called bombs.
What did a bomb actually do mechanically? Was it just a giant early computer calculating possibilities?
It wasn't calculating answers, it was calculating logical contradictions.
Okay, how so?
A bomb was essentially dozens of Enigma rotors wired together. The operators would plug in a crib that guessed at a phrase and turn the bomb on.
And the machine would rapidly cycle through rotor positions.
Right. If a position resulted in a logical contradiction, like a letter encrypting to itself, the machine kept spinning. It only stopped when it found a position where no contradictions existed.
That drastically narrowed down the possibilities, allowing human code breakers to figure out the plugboard settings and read the day's traffic.
The strategic impact is almost unfathomable. This was the ultra-intelligence.
The Allies could suddenly read the communications of the U-boat wolf packs terrorizing the Atlantic. They could route civilian supply convoys around the submarines.
They knew exactly which German divisions were waiting behind the beaches of Normandy before D-Day.
But, here is where we hit a profound ethical wall in the text. I want to pose this scenario to you, to the listener.
It's a tough one.
You are an Allied commander. You have an intercepted, decrypted message sitting on your desk. You know a U-boat is waiting in a specific grid square to sink a ship full of troops and supplies.
Your immediate instinct is to reroute the ship to save thousands of lives.
Obviously. But if you do that, the German High Command might notice that you perfectly avoided an invisible submarine.
They will suspect Enigma is compromised, they will change the entire system, and you will go totally blind.
That is the most agonizing calculus of covert intelligence. If you hold the key to the enemy's code, how do you live with the choice of letting Allied convoys sink just to protect the secret that you are listening?
It's a utilitarian nightmare. The value of the source, the ability to read the enemy's mind, is prioritized over the immediate tactical outcome.
To protect the ultra-secret, Allied commanders frequently had to let attacks happen. They let ships sink.
Or, if they absolutely had to act on the intelligence, they had to manufacture an elaborate fiction.
Right, like sending a seemingly lost reconnaissance plane to accidentally fly over the U-boat so the Germans would think, they spotted us by chance.
Rather than they are reading our mail, it requires an incredible degree of cold, systemic detachment.
It exposes the brutal reality of intelligence warfare. Saving the world sometimes requires standing by and watching people die to protect your advantage.
It does.
Yeah.
Which provides a stark contrast to what the Nazi regime was doing internally.
Yes, exactly. Because Enigma was focused outward on military strategy and naval dominance.
But inside the borders of the Third Reich and across the territories they occupied, they faced the problem of controlling millions of hostile civilians.
And to achieve this, they fused intelligence gathering not with mathematics, but with state-sponsored terror. We are looking now at the creation of the Sicherheitsdienst, the SD.
Under Reinhard Heydrich.
Yes, the architecture of terror.
Reinhard Heydrich was arguably the most coldly efficient bureaucratic architect of terror in the 20th century.
In 1931, Heinrich Himmler tasked him with creating an intelligence service for the SS.
Right, because prior to this, Nazi internal security was a fractured mess of competing agencies.
Heydrich envisioned a centralized, elite intelligence apparatus that would map the entire societal structure of Germany and eventually Europe in order to dominate it.
And Whitmore's text makes it clear this wasn't an intelligence agency in the traditional sense of gathering data to inform foreign policy.
No, the SD was a machine built for societal sterilization. They didn't just target foreign spies.
They built an immense, meticulous filing system using index cards.
Just millions of index cards.
Yeah, mapping out political dissidents, union leaders, clergy, Freemasons, and crucially, the Jewish populations.
They employed a vast methodology of surveillance. Early, systematic telephone wiretapping, massive mail interception, and censorship operations.
But primarily, it relied on a sprawling network of civilian informants, neighbors reporting on neighbors.
The SD weaponized human petty grievances and fear to feed their card indexes.
It's this chilling intersection where espionage merges seamlessly with genocide.
Because when the German army invaded Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, the SD didn't just provide maps of enemy troop movements.
They provided the structural intelligence backbone for the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing squads.
The SD's meticulous files told the squads exactly who to round up and execute in every occupied village. They used data collection to execute the Holocaust.
Heydrich's system was so brutally effective, and he became so deeply feared as the Butcher of Prague when he governed occupied Czechoslovakia, that the British SOE and the Czech resistance concluded he had to be eliminated.
Which led to Operation Anthropoid in 1942.
Yes.
2 Czech soldiers, trained in Britain, parachuted in. They ambushed Heydrich's open-top Mercedes as it slowed around a sharp curve in Prague.
One soldier's submachine gun jammed, but the other threw a modified anti-tank grenade that exploded near the rear wheel.
Shrapnel and horsehair from the car seat embedded in Heydrich's body, and he died of sepsis days later. It was a massive triumph for the resistance.
But the SD's reaction to his death illustrates the absolute horror of totalitarian intelligence.
It wasn't a surgical counterintelligence operation to find the killers.
No, it was blind, disproportionate reprisal. Based on incredibly flimsy, fabricated intelligence, they surrounded the village of Lidice.
They executed all the men, sent the women to concentration camps, and literally bulldozed the village off the map.
Just erased it.
Which brings up a critical question regarding the actual effectiveness of an agency built entirely on terror.
What's your theory?
Well, we usually think of intelligence agencies as seeking to understand the world. Heydrich's SD used intelligence to proactively eradicate parts of it.
Right.
So if I am an average citizen living in occupied Prague or Berlin, and I am terrified of being sent to a camp, I am going to be highly compliant.
That's right.
I will tell the SD whatever they want to hear. So doesn't that immense fear make the intelligence gathering easier? Did the sheer terror the SD inspired actually degrade their intelligence quality?
That's the paradox. On the surface, it seems to ensure compliance, but mechanically, terror destroys the fidelity of intelligence.
Because people just lie to survive.
Exactly. When you govern by absolute existential fear, truth becomes entirely subordinate to survival.
If an SD officer demands names from an informant, that informant will fabricate names just to appease the officer.
Or people use the anonymous denunciation system to settle personal scores.
Yeah.
To get rid of a business rival or to take a neighbor's apartment.
So the system just floods with noise.
Precisely. It creates a massive feedback loop of paranoia. The SD's files became bloated with fabricated threats and false conspiracies generated by the very terror they utilized to gather the data.
They were incredibly effective at crushing organized resistance through sheer blunt force.
But their granular understanding of societal reality was constantly polluted by the fear they manufactured.
And we see that structural flaw completely self-destruct when they try to export this model.
Oh, absolutely.
They attempt to apply this methodology of subversion to the vast expanse of the Eastern Front, and they hit an absolute brick wall. Let's dig into Operation Zeppelin.
Operation Zeppelin, launched by the SD and the Abwehr in 1942, was an attempt to take the asymmetric sabotage tactics we saw in Pistorius, scale them up massively, and apply them behind Soviet lines.
The strategic objective was to parachute teams of agents deep into Soviet territory to blow up critical railway junctions, destroy supply depots in the Ural Mountains,
and, most ambitiously, incite anti-Soviet uprisings among ethnic minority populations.
But to achieve this, they needed native speakers. I mean, you can't drop a German from Bavaria into the Russian steppes and expect him to blend in.
No. So the SS scoured the prisoner of war camps.
They recruited captured Soviet soldiers, Russian émigrés, and individuals from ethnic minorities who harbored deep, legitimate grievances against Joseph Stalin's brutal regime.
They promised them weapons, training, and the chance to liberate their homelands.
They trained these recruits in radio transmission, parachuting, and demolition.
But the operational realities were a nightmare of geography and counterintelligence.
Right. They were dropping agents into massive freezing distances where simply surviving the climate after landing was a challenge.
More importantly, they were parachuting them directly into the jaws of the Soviet NKVD.
The hyper-efficient, utterly ruthless internal security apparatus that eventually became the KGB.
And the Soviet response wasn't just to shoot these agents. That would be a waste of an asset.
Right. The NKVD mastered the art of the radio game, or Funkspiel.
When they captured a Zeppelin team, they would subject them to intense interrogation and torture. Once broken, they would force the captured radio operator to sit at his transmitter and continue sending messages back to Berlin.
Acting as if the mission was proceeding perfectly, the mechanics of these radio games were fascinating.
They really were. Every radio operator has a unique rhythm when tapping Morse code, known as their fist.
Like a signature.
Exactly. Berlin intelligence officers knew the fists of their agents. Furthermore, the agents were given secret security checks.
Like intentionally misspelling a specific word to signal if they were transmitting under duress.
But the Soviets were meticulous. They learned the security checks. They studied the fists.
If an operator tried to signal he was captured, the NKVD often caught it, tortured him until he corrected it.
Or they simply fabricated a reason for the transmission anomaly, like claiming the agent had injured his hand during the parachute drop.
So Berlin was receiving highly detailed requests for more supplies, more agents, and more weapons to support phantom uprisings that didn't exist.
The Luftwaffe would fly deep into Soviet airspace to drop supply canisters right into the waiting hands of the NKVD.
The Germans could never be entirely certain if they were commanding a vibrant partisan network or talking directly to a Soviet intelligence officer laughing on the other end of the radio.
It was an atmosphere of total paranoia.
I am struggling with the fundamental logic of the Nazi planners here.
How so?
Well, we know the foundational ideology of the Third Reich was built on virulent racial hierarchy. They explicitly categorized Slavic peoples as subhuman, fit only for enslavement or extermination. Knowing this, why on earth did the SD think they could recruit Soviet populations, arm them, and trust them to operate as loyal, independent, covert assets?
It's massive cognitive dissonance.
It's completely absurd.
It is the ultimate blind spot of ideological fanaticism. Intelligence networks require, at a minimum, reliable transactional benefits, if not mutual trust.
But Nazi racial rigidity made that impossible.
The German handlers viewed their own recruits with deep contempt and suspicion. And the recruits, even those who legitimately hated Stalin, eventually realized that the Germans viewed them as disposable tools.
They understood that the regime handing them explosives ultimately planned to eradicate their people once the war was won.
You cannot sustain a loyal covert network when your foundational ideology promises the destruction of your own assets. It's a structural paradox.
So the Third Reich ultimately collapses. The war ends in absolute ruin. The Red Army takes Berlin, the Allies take the West.
But the deeply uncomfortable reality of Whitmore's text is that the total collapse of the Third Reich did not mean the end of German intelligence.
No, it meant its dark assets were immediately auctioned off to the highest bidder in the new Cold War.
Let's look at the pragmatic, deeply compromised pivot of the post-war era, starting with Operation Paperclip and the Gehlen Organization.
As the dust of World War II settled in 1945, the geopolitical landscape fractured immediately.
The United States and the Soviet Union went from uneasy allies to existential adversaries overnight.
And the West realized that while the Nazi regime was evil, it possessed highly advanced technological and intelligence capabilities.
The U.S. military concluded they could not allow those assets to fall into Soviet hands.
Thus, Operation Paperclip, the covert initiative to extract over 1,000 German scientists, aerospace engineers, and technicians,
Many of whom were deeply embedded in the Nazi Party machine.
and quietly integrate them into the American military-industrial complex.
They brought over Werner von Braun to build rockets. The justification was pure realpolitik. If we don't take these mines, the Soviets will, and they will use them against us.
But the compromise wasn't limited to aerospace engineers. It extended to spies. Which brings us to a man named Reinhard Gehlen.
Gehlen was a major general in the Wehrmacht. During the war, he commanded Foreign Armies East, the military intelligence division tasked exclusively with analyzing the Soviet military.
As the Eastern Front collapsed, Gehlen saw the writing on the wall.
He realized his encyclopedic knowledge of the Soviet Red Army was his only currency for survival.
So before the surrender, he ordered his staff to microfilm their massive intelligence archives.
They packed them into watertight drums and buried them in the Bavarian Alps.
He essentially curates his own resume, buries it in the mountains, and then calmly waits for the Americans to arrest him so he can negotiate a job offer.
And the staggering part is that the Americans accepted the deal.
The U.S. military and later the CIA were utterly blind behind the emerging Iron Curtain. They had almost no human assets in Eastern Europe.
Gehlen offered them a fully formed, operational spy network.
So the U.S. agreed to fund him, protect him from war crimes tribunals, and allow him to reconstitute his intelligence apparatus.
Gehlen begins recruiting his old colleagues. This organization, funded by American taxpayer dollars, becomes the Gehlen Organization.
And he didn't just hire harmless analysts. He brought in former SS officers, members of the SD, men who had actively participated in the atrocities on the Eastern Front.
He argued that to fight the Soviets, he needed men who knew how the Soviets operated, regardless of their pasts.
This decision created an enduring controversy. I have to forcefully question this realpolitik.
Go ahead.
You often hear that the U.S. had no choice because the Soviet threat was so immediate. But look at what happens. The Gehlen Organization doesn't stay a temporary rogue outfit.
No, in 1956, it is officially absorbed by the West German government.
It literally becomes the Bundesnachrichtendienst, the BND, the Democratic Intelligence Agency of West Germany. You are constructing the foundation of a democratic West German intelligence agency using the architects of a totalitarian nightmare. How much of the democratic foundation rots when you use poisoned bricks?
The institutional rot was severe and immediate. By rehabilitating war criminals in the name of anti-communism, the West severely compromised its moral high ground.
But beyond the profound ethical stain, it created massive operational vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. When you staff a clandestine agency with men who are terrified of their wartime atrocities being exposed, you have built an agency of men perfectly primed for blackmail.
Because the Soviets and the East Germans kept their own files on these guys.
Exactly. The KGB and the East German intelligence services recognized this immediately
They systematically identified former Nazis within the Gehlen organization.
and presented them with a simple choice. Quietly pass information to the East, or we will leak your SS records to the Western press and watch you stand trial.
While Gehlen provided the U.S. with some vital short-term tactical data, his organization was disastrously penetrated by Soviet double agents.
Precisely because of the compromised pasts of his staff.
Meanwhile, across the newly drawn border in East Germany, the Soviets weren't awkwardly trying to integrate former enemies.
No, they were building a brand new, highly efficient apparatus of control from scratch, modeled on Stalinist repression.
If Heydrich's SD was the blunt architecture of terror, East Germany's Ministry for State Security, the Stasi, perfected the science of the surveillance state.
Creating a society defined by total paranoia.
Under the command of Erich Mielke, the Stasi operated on a scale that dwarfed the Gestapo.
Their mandate was to be the shield and sword of the party, rooting out any ideological deviation before it could manifest into action.
To give you a sense of the staggering scale of this surveillance network, by the time the Berlin Wall fell, it is estimated that roughly 1 in every 63 East Germans was acting as an unofficial collaborator.
And I am.
1 in 63, that is a suffocating statistic.
It means it wasn't just James Bond-style agents in trench coats.
It meant your postman might be an informant, the person teaching your child's kindergarten class, the guy working next to you at the factory.
It created an environment where you literally could not speak your mind in your own kitchen.
And their methods of dealing with suspected dissidents evolved. In the early days, they used midnight arrests and brutal physical interrogations.
But the Stasi realized that overt brutality creates martyrs. It attracts international condemnation,
So they developed a psychological methodology called Zersetzung,
which translates to decomposition or biodegradation.
the terrifying tactic of Zersetzung. The mechanics are horrifying because they are so mundane.
If the Stasi identified someone as a threat, maybe an environmental activist or an independent writer, they wouldn't arrest them.
They would slowly, systematically destroy their personal and professional life.
They utilized their vast network of IMs to map the target's entire social circle. Then they would begin the psychological warfare.
They would spread targeted rumors at the target's workplace, suggesting they were an embezzler or, ironically, a Stasi informant, isolating them from their colleagues.
They would intercept their mail and fail to deliver important documents. Career sabotage.
Yeah.
Relationship destruction.
They would even break into the target's apartment while they were at work, but they wouldn't steal anything.
No, they would subtly alter the environment to induce a sense of paranoia. They would move a painting 2 inches to the left.
They would change the brand of coffee in the cabinet.
They would set the alarm clock to go off an hour late, making the person constantly late for work.
The goal was to destabilize the individual's mental health to the point where they were too paralyzed by anxiety, depression, and paranoia to engage in any anti-state activities.
It is a form of state-sponsored gaslighting that leaves no physical bruises, making it incredibly difficult for the victim to prove they are being targeted.
It is the total atomization of society. But there is a massive irony here. The Stasi was so deeply terrified of its own citizens that it required hundreds of thousands of informants just to maintain a grip on reality.
Right.
Yet, simultaneously, their foreign intelligence branch was competent enough to execute some of the most sophisticated, patient, and devastating infiltrations of the entire Cold War.
You're talking about the Günther Guillaume affair.
Exactly. Let's look at Guillaume. He is the textbook definition of a deep-cover sleeper agent.
In the mid-1950s, the Stasi sent Guillaume and his wife across the border into West Germany. Their cover story was incredibly mundane. They were simply refugees fleeing the East.
They settled in Frankfurt, set up a small business, and began living seemingly ordinary lives.
They didn't go immediately looking for military bases to photograph. They played a very, very long game.
Patient, long-term grooming by the Stasi, Guillaume joined the Social Democratic Party, the SPD.
He started at the very bottom, handing out flyers, organizing local community meetings, being the helpful, charming guy who was always willing to work late.
Over the course of 15 years, he built genuine, robust social and political capital.
He proved himself to be a highly competent and fiercely loyal party organizer.
He steadily climbed the ranks of the SPD apparatus until he finally crossed paths with Willy Brandt,
who would eventually become the Chancellor of West Germany.
Guillaume becomes so trusted that he is appointed as one of Chancellor Brandt's 3 personal secretaries.
This is a Stasi operative who now has unparalleled access to the highest levels of West German government.
He is managing Brandt's schedule. He is handling the chancellor's private correspondence.
He is sitting in on highly sensitive briefings regarding NATO strategy and West Germany's delicate diplomatic overtures to the Eastern Bloc.
When West German counterintelligence finally uncovered the truth in 1974, largely through intercepted, decoded radio transmissions that mentioned personal details matching Guillaume's life, the fallout was seismic.
The revelation that the Chancellor's right-hand man was passing state secrets to East Berlin forced Willy Brandt to resign in disgrace.
It was a catastrophic failure for Western security. I look at the Guillaume case, and I have to ask how an open, democratic society can possibly defend against a sleeper who has spent a decade building genuine social capital.
If an agent doesn't act like a spy, if they don't steal documents in the dead of night, but instead spend 15 years building verifiable, legitimate trust.
The only way to catch them early seems to require monitoring everyone all the time.
And that is the enduring vulnerability of an open society. Democracies operate on a baseline assumption of trust and privacy.
Totalitarian systems view that trust as a structural weakness to be exploited.
To proactively detect a sleeper agent like Guillaume before they gain access, a democracy would have to institute incredibly intrusive, continuous vetting of its own citizens' private lives.
And that friction brings us back to the core dilemma. If you build a counterintelligence state aggressive enough to find a Guillaume at the grassroots level, you risk mutating your democracy into the very Stasi-like state you're trying to protect yourself against. And that tension did not evaporate when the Berlin Wall finally fell. The Cold War ended, Germany reunified, and the sheer horror of the Stasi's paper trails was exposed to the public.
But the legacy of surveillance didn't die.
No, it simply migrated from manila folders to servers. It digitized. Let's bring this narrative into the modern era, to the digital frontier of NSA and BND surveillance and the modern cyber threats.
The attacks of September 11, 2001 fundamentally altered the global intelligence mandate.
The focus abruptly shifted from monitoring nation-states to tracking decentralized, highly mobile terrorist networks.
The German BND quickly realized that they lacked the technological infrastructure to monitor global digital communications effectively.
They needed the massive technological superiority of their American counterpart, the National Security Agency.
This led to a deeply complex, highly controversial post-9/11 cooperation.
The sources detailed joint initiatives like Project Iconol, and this wasn't about putting a microphone in a specific target's living room.
No, this was about tapping directly into the massive fiber optic cables that carry the world's internet traffic through hubs like Frankfurt.
To understand the scale, we have to look at how fiber optics work.
These cables transmit data as pulses of light. The intelligence agencies used optical splitters, essentially prisms placed directly on the cables.
When a pulse of light passes through the prism, it splits, sending the original signal to its intended destination.
And simultaneously sending an exact duplicate to an intelligence data center.
So they are hoovering up massive amounts of European data, duplicating the flow of the river without starving the water.
And to process this unimaginable flood of data, the NSA provided the BND with a software system called XKeyscore.
XKeyscore was essentially a highly sophisticated search engine for global intercepts.
When data flows across a tapped cable, it is broken down into packets. XKeyscore allowed analysts to filter these packets, not just for specific content, but for metadata.
Who is emailing whom, from what location, at what time, using what type of encryption?
This massive dragnet operation remained highly classified until 2013, when Edward Snowden leaked a trove of NSA documents.
The revelations hit Germany like a geopolitical earthquake.
The documents showed that this dragnet wasn't just sweeping up the communications of suspected terrorists in foreign countries.
It was capturing the private emails, browsing histories, and instant messages of ordinary German citizens, European corporations, and allied politicians.
The most explosive revelation in Germany was Operation Rubicon, which exposed the surveillance of German citizens and Chancellor Angela Merkel herself.
The NSA had been monitoring her mobile phone communications. The public backlash was immense.
Completely understandable.
I want to draw a direct line here from the past to the present because this is where the history feels incredibly urgent.
Okay, let's hear it.
We talked about the Stasi, employing 1 in 63 citizens to passively monitor their neighbors, gathering massive amounts of trivial data just in case it proved useful later. If we look at mass digital data collection, where algorithms flag keywords in billions of private emails, storing metadata indiscriminately,
Is that not just a sanitized, algorithm-driven version of the Stasi's informant network?
Exactly. I push you to define the line there. What is the philosophical difference?
It is a comparison that resonates deeply within German society, precisely because of their history. The crucial difference, intelligence agencies argue, lies in the intent and the oversight.
Okay, intent.
The Stasi collected data to exert psychological control over its population and suppress dissent. The BND and NSA argue they collect bulk data to identify anomalous patterns, to find the terrorist cell communicating before an attack.
They argue that to find the needle, you must first possess the entire haystack.
But the deep hypocrisy was palpable to the German public.
Here was a reunified Germany, a nation that had painstakingly dismantled the Gestapo and the Stasi, a nation with some of the strictest privacy laws on earth.
Discovering that its own democratic intelligence agency was legally maneuvering to allow a foreign power to conduct mass surveillance on its soil.
It highlighted how technology had completely outpaced legal frameworks, analyzed the modern democratic struggle to balance national security with civil liberties.
The line between necessary cyber defense against hostile states and the erosion of the very democratic privacy the state claims to protect becomes incredibly blurred when a single algorithmic sweep captures the private lives of millions.
And yet, the text makes it painfully clear that the digital threats are not hypothetical.
Not at all.
Germany is currently fighting an active, invisible war every single day. The digital battlefield is the new front line. We are talking about state-sponsored cyber espionage.
Primarily originating from Russian intelligence agencies like the GRU and the FSB.
Germany is a prime target for Russian cyber operations because it is the economic engine of Europe and a central pillar of NATO.
The contemporary threats outlined in Whitmore's text are severe. We are not just talking about stealing state secrets.
We are talking about highly sophisticated malware designed to infiltrate the networks of the German Bundestag, the parliament.
We are seeing sustained campaigns aimed at stealing intellectual property from Germany's advanced manufacturing and green energy sectors.
It's hybrid warfare. They use phishing emails to gain access to a server, steal data, and then potentially weaponize that data through disinformation campaigns to manipulate democratic elections.
To counter this, Germany has had to evolve once again.
They've had to develop offensive cyber capabilities within the BND, recognizing that passive defense is no longer sufficient.
They have even launched civilian initiatives like the Cyberwar.
Essentially, a cyber militia where civilian cybersecurity experts can volunteer their skills to help defend municipal digital infrastructure during a crisis.
It is the ultimate game of cat and mouse. It is the Enigma machine all over again. It is the radio games of Operation Zeppelin.
But instead of U-boats and parachute drops, the infiltration is happening via lines of code, exploiting vulnerabilities in software architecture.
We have covered an immense, dark expanse of history today. Let's try to synthesize the definitive message of Whitmore's text.
Germany's unique position, the epicenter of WWII, the fault line of the Cold War, and a leading modern digital economy, force its intelligence agencies into a state of relentless, ruthless adaptation.
They had to navigate the collapse of totalitarian regimes, the morally bankrupt repurposing of poisoned human assets, and the dizzying transition from analog terror to algorithmic surveillance.
And the shatters of that totalitarian past, the methods of the SD, the paranoia of the Stasi, the ethical compromises of the Gehlen organization, they are not just historical footnotes.
They are the context through which modern Germany struggles to balance its urgent need for national security with its desperate desire for transparent democratic oversight.
Which leads me to a final provocative thought for the listener, something to mull over.
Go ahead.
If the very nature of espionage requires secrecy, deception, and the breaking of rules, can a fully transparent democratic intelligence agency ever truly exist? Or are we, as citizens, forced to accept that the shadows of totalitarian methods will always linger in the servers of modern cyber defense?
It is the fundamental paradox of protecting a free society.
We've reached the end of this analysis. If this episode added value to your day, please leave a like, share it, and subscribe to Strategic Labs so we can keep deconstructing narratives. Remember to check the video description. See you in the next analysis.